Welcome everybody to the first virtual Climate Emergency and Environment Executive Panel of Norwich City Council. This meeting is held under the Local Authorities and Police and Crime Panels Coronavirus Flexibility of Local Authorities and Police and Crime Panel Meetings, England and Wales, Regulations 2020, meaning that recommendations made will have the same validity as those made at a meeting held at City Hall. We've elected members of the council. We have elected members of the council attending the meeting. We also have the council's democratic services staff to help administrate the meeting. Members must be able to hear and, where practicable, see other members. Therefore, we ask all members to keep their video on during the business of the meeting. A recording of this meeting will appear on the council's YouTube channel, and the meeting will be live streamed. If we're notified by our colleague in IT that this link is not working, we will take a short adjournment while the issue is resolved. Can I ask participants to ensure that they are muted when not speaking, or you may be muted by an officer to maintain audio quality. The chat function is enabled for members to report technical difficulties and to indicate that they would like to speak on an item, but you will only be able to message the chair, vice chair and democratic services. It is, I just point that out, the chat function is there for that and not for anything else. Please don't enter into a discourse or a multi-course with others. Voting will be done using a raised hand. And when this happens, I ask you to raise your hand clearly in front of your screen and keep it there until I announce the number of votes. Please bear with us while we count the votes, as this may take a little longer than usual, as officers check between screens to ensure all members have been seen. We may need to take a short break, but a comfort break, and we will if needed. So I want to begin this meeting, and I've got a few words very quickly because we are running late. But the first thing I'd like to do is to thank Richard and his team. So I will welcome everybody, as I've done that. Thank Richard and the team, and I'll say a few more about that. I should have asked, of course, immediately, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? No, good. And then, of course, you've had copies of the minutes of the last meeting. Is everybody happy with those minutes? Do we accept them? Yes, lots of nods and thumbs. So those minutes are accepted. And I will, because I'm in City Hall, I will sign an actual copy of the minutes. So that the business is done. Anyway, so I wanted to say and just frame very quickly this meeting, because I think the first thing to note is that despite everything that could be thrown at it, we've got today the near perfect draft of the Norwich City Council's 4th environmental strategy that will run from 2020 to 25. It was nearly ready last year, but then there were 3 elections within an 8-month period. Each one resulted in another pre-election period when no new policy could be brought forth. So that was 18 weeks that were lost, and officers were taken up with preparations. Officers were also involved in preparations for the 4th election in 12 months, and then that obviously was adjourned for 12 months, but some of that work had been done. So during this pandemic, we've seen officers work from home, many being redeployed to help with such things as making the thousands. The last time I looked at the figures was about 3 weeks ago, and we've made over 6,000 phone calls to support residents who are being shielded. Those officers have also helped to run the food hub in the halls. They've marshalled volunteers who've made hundreds of visits to the shielded people, bringing medicines, parcels of appropriate and fresh food, including to those on special diets. So they've worked through all of this and produced another superb plan that truly challenges everyone within the City Hall, our contractors and our partners. And I want to thank our officers, Richard and his team, and I'm going to say a little bit more about their work. This actual strategy has seen several iterations, has come before us already. We've debated, advised and recommended in our cross-party panel. Our officers have listened, we've taken on board those comments, and they are, where appropriate, have been added in to the strategy. But that strategy has been looked at. We're not going to get our shovels out and dig through it all again. What we are going to do is we're going to talk about the consultation and the contribution that's made to the strategy. And at this point, I want to remind everybody, including myself, that we were constituted as an advisory panel. We are there to make recommendations to Cabinet. So the recommendations that come from this meeting will go to the Cabinet in a week's time. And therefore, I want you to focus on recommendations. What I don't want to do is spend the time digging through, identifying a missing possessive apostrophe or a past participle. That's not what this meeting is about. I need to say a little bit more about the work that's gone through by our officers in getting and going through this consultation, because it is an opus magnum, and opera magna do not appear from a hole in the ground. From the release of the predecessor strategy in 2015, Richard and his team have been monitoring both its progress and what new possibilities are on or just over the horizon. And it's that constant vigilance, their research endeavours and regular updating that's helped to produce this excellent work that's before us. I need, however, to make a special mention for this work, because I just let you think about what they've had to do. And I want you to imagine that you've asked someone a specific question, and in response, they've given you 800-word essay. And somewhere you've got to go through that 800 or those 800 words. And there are 7 questions in that questionnaire. And our officers have had over 100 responses. So they've had to go through, categorize, test those categories, re-categorize, and then done all of this work in order to get to the point where they can turn this qualitative data into a quantitative form to give us the comments that they have. So a magnificent piece of work, and I really want to thank them for that. So what I'd like to do then now is to say we've got this draft before us. We're not looking at what we've already gone through. We're focusing on recommendations that will go through to Cabinet. We are being strategic, and I want us to remember that. It's not about minutiae, it's about a strategic or a set of strategic comments. So I'm sorry to have taken so much time, but I think there are important things that I've had to say. Okay, so I now open the meeting for people's comments, and I'm not used to this, as I might not spot raised hands or messages, but I do want to try and identify. So in a moment, I'm going to start inviting comments, but before I do so, the main author of this report, Richard, obviously wants to set it within a number of contexts. So I'm going to pass over to Richard to speak to the panel on this. Now, are you self-muted, Richard, or do we need to unmute you?
I was right, self-muted.
Okay, over to you.
Okay, so obviously, as Kevin said, I'll start from Appendix 2 on page 52 of the report. And thank you, Kevin, for the background on that. So yeah, the consultation ran from December to the end of January and took advantage of a window that was available to us through the election cycle that was described. Obviously, this exercise was run in conjunction with asking various stakeholders to comment either directly through me or indirectly through the online consultation process, which was anonymised. The consultation, as Kevin said, received over 107 responses on the 7 questions, which I don't need to go through. They're on the report. And some of the responses, as Kevin said, did run into pages, and it was quite a difficult exercise to collate that information and to put it in through some analytical responses to get where we're at with this report. I'll briefly go through, if I may, the summaries of each question, if that's okay. I'll try and be as quickly as possible. Obviously, for question 1, it was clear from the consultation that the respondees believed that the council operated or had significant influence over a number of services in which the council had little or no control over. Maybe that can be explained as local government is different, well, there's different models depending on where you are within the UK. So obviously in Norwich, we have a 2-tier system with the county council taking responsibility of services such as transport, highways and education. So those type of comments were received in the consultation. And I think it's important to recognise that it's not services that the council actually runs, so would have to work in partnership with the county council to make any alterations to those services which came through the consultation. I think it's also important to note that in Norwich, or what many people consider Norwich, there are 3 councils running what I'd like to call the lower tier services, which is the services that the city council runs, which are waste collection and planning, for example. So it was clear that many citizens that applied through the consultation process may have also been living outside the city. So what we've tried to do is make it clear that the Norwich City Council is for the area that's run by the city council and not the holistic Norwich. That might have to be something that we work on in the future with others. There's a number of comments also that related to services that are delivered by the private sector, such as buses, for example, and where possible and appropriate, we'll work with these industries and businesses to see what we can do to improve the services in regards to sustainability. The consultation also received numerous comments about diet again and lifestyle choices. Obviously, the council will work to influence these behaviours, especially ones that have pro-environmental outcomes like recycling. However, we have to be mindful about how those messages are portrayed to the public so that we maximise and get as much support as possible. And I know colleagues at the communications team are going to be working on hopefully some new campaigns as part of the rollout of the environmental strategy moving forwards. I think it's also from question 1 to note that there is high level ambition in the city to become as sustainable as quickly as possible, and we did receive numerous ideas, and hopefully over time we can explore the potential of these ideas and investigate their possibility of being delivered. A number of residents also referred to the climate emergency and the targets set within the strategy. Obviously, the council has formally recognised the climate emergency, and we hope that through this strategy we'll be able to demonstrate how the city council will be answering that call. We've also added some extra scientific data in regards to some of the comments received, the inclusion of scattered tool and the Tyndall pathway analysis is now within the strategy. Hopefully the final draft will have a little bit more imagery than the one that you can see in front of you now. So that's a summary of question 1. I hope that was okay and I didn't go too quickly through it. Question 2, in terms of the responses, again, there was a lot of information about what the council can't influence. So that was private companies and activities which are not publicly owned. I think we have to be mindful that we do have to work with a variety of external stakeholders to enable positive change where possible, and the council does recognise the importance of community leadership, and hopefully through our new 2030 target we can be a channel for others that want to work with us within the boundaries of the city vision to deliver a more sustainable Norwich. In regards to green spaces, it's also something that we're going to be working on, and we'll be producing a green spaces strategy and a biodiversity strategy later this year, and the biodiversity strategy in 2021. Question 3, participants were asked to prioritise a range of environmental issues. The raw data has been provided for you. What did come out of this question was the difficulty in ranking one issue against the other, and many of the consultees said they would consider them all important, or they made reference to the fact that they are interlinked with one another, so they're all equally important in many respects. Question 4, the answers to this question reflected again the difficulty of selecting one or two priorities as being of greater importance. Obviously, where the regulatory frameworks are non-existent, for example, there was lots of suggestions around energy trading, or where technology might not quite be ready, the council will obviously take appropriate steps to develop programs when we have the regulatory frameworks, or when the technologies are actually viable. At the moment, there's a lot of technologies coming through, but they're not quite ready to be implemented, and we'll be obviously watching the space to see how we can instigate these in the future. And again, where scientific analysis allows and better measurements of emission happens at a national and regional level, that obviously the council will adopt these standards if they are statistically robust. So there's a lot of comments around, you know, why can't we have consumed emissions reporting, or reporting of aviation or military emissions as part of the council's area emissions. And obviously where possible, and where these are scientifically robust and provided by central government, we can maybe use these in the future, but at the moment they don't seem to be available at a local level or below. So obviously there was some comments about the council providing services that they might not be able to do due to the ongoing austerity. And again, if there is business cases to do so, the council will investigate, you know, new possibilities of working differently. Question 5 was a bit more simple in terms of how we plan to engage. There's quite a lot of comments, 422 responses in total, and we can hopefully use that information to build our communication campaigns going forwards. Obviously, we want to communicate these issues to a broad base of citizens, either online or via physical events. So this information is useful to build on what the council's been doing in the past. Question 6, obviously as people progressed through the questionnaire, we started to get less responses, but the responses that we did have were quite long and engaged. From this question, again, a lot of the consultees were saying that communication is key to working with citizens and businesses to deliver what hopefully will be a net zero Norwich by 2050 or sooner. there was a lot of comments around implementing localised schemes in addition to national programmes, and I think the council must be mindful that hopefully as the government starts to put forward more funding for, let's say, retrofitting social housing, private sector housing, the council will have an important part to play in delivering those domestic improvements. And again, I think where the ambition of the citizens comes across the austerity of the council, we have to be mindful of the limited resources that we have, and we are reliant on central government to come up with new sources of funding so that we can continue to reduce emissions in the city. I think it's important that people did recognise that the council had made significant progress over the last 10 years. So far, that's produced a 56% reduction in our own emissions, and we have now set, through some of the amendments of the environmental strategy, a new target of 0 net emissions by 2030, and there's been a 45% fall in per capita emissions. Bayes, who produce these statistics, have updated this, and last week that's now turned into a 52% reduction. So obviously the city is still trending in the right direction, and we've now sort of reached that milestone where we're producing half the emissions that we were more than 12 years ago. And then finally, on question 7, respondents were given a final opportunity to comment on the strategy in a free text box. And this is quite rare for consultations to give that opportunity, where people can just literally type as much as they want to give the fullest response possible. One respondee nearly did a 1,000-word essay on question 7, and you can see some of the points from 1 to 14 that we received in terms of changes that we could make to the document as it was in draft. So to conclude, as I don't want to take up too much time, obviously the consultation results have been scrutinised by the environmental strategy team, and considerations have been made on how viable some of the suggestions made by respondents were. Some respondents would like the council to maintain their current level of ambition and were happy as is with the environmental strategy. Obviously others weren't. It was quite a fair split, but about 50-50. Obviously people recognised that it was difficult to prioritise different environmental themes. Obviously what they'd want is the council to deliver against all of them. However, with ongoing austerity and the use of scientific tools, I think we can probably focus some of the efforts or some of the resources of the council on areas of high emissions, such as domestic housing. Respondents referred to the climate emergency and some of the new tools that were available, and those have been included in the strategy. And the consultation also received numerous comments around diet and lifestyle choices, and again, where appropriate, the council will try to create programs that continue to influence behaviours that have pro-environmental outcomes. On the final page, I believe there's the changes, or some of the changes that the council has made to the environmental strategy. So it's pretty clear where we've taken on board the feedback and made alterations to the document. I think I'll leave it on that, if that's okay.
Right. Thank you very much, Richard. Really appreciate that. And your sort of very clear summary of them. So comments, views, and remember we are really focusing on any recommendations we might like to make to Cabinet. That's what we have been constituted for. So can you focus your thoughts on this? So anybody? I've not got, can't see. Judith, just please go ahead.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chair. Can I start by, again, thanking, as you did, thanking the officers for this work. It has been very detailed work, and unfortunately, it's been very drawn out. And I think that that has been, it's been disappointing in lots of ways. It seems like almost a year ago that we were considering this last October at the last meeting. And much has got in the way. And so to some extent, I think that we need to update the forward that will be going with this strategy to reflect the current COVID experience that we are experiencing. And I think if we look back and say what we did some years ago, we need to also reflect the future and the current time that this is being produced in. So I do think that the forward that you are writing, I think, Chair, needs to reflect the changes that we are experiencing at the moment. And I think if we don't do that, that is a missed opportunity. That's the least we could do. I think that there is more that we should do in this to actually reflect the changing times. But I think as a starting point, and it is trying to be constructive, that we need to look at the forward again and make sure there is more information about the changing times that we happen to be in now, and perhaps teasing out the opportunities that COVID has brought us, and as well as the challenges, but the opportunities, and I think that they should be included there. Okay. I mean, ideally, I think I'd say scrap it and let's start again, because I think we are in a different place and we want to reimagine a different future. But I know that's not going to happen, and it's unfair to everybody who's worked so hard on this. But I think it looks a very out of date strategy if we don't mention the context of COVID at the moment. And I would just like to say that there is an inaccuracy on page 27, which is, we're looking back on page 27 when we, I think we're talking about the idea of hosting a citizens' assembly, and we go back to 2008. The Council commissioned an independent climate change committee to shape and inform our environmental policies. It says this event chaired by our Lord Mayor, Professor Tim O'Riordan. Tim O'Riordan was never a Lord Mayor. You can't have a Lord Mayor that's not actually a member of the council.
Yes, well spotted, Judith. He was the sheriff. You're right.
And actually, to go back to 2008, 12 years ago, well, I think forget it. It's too old.
Thank you, Judith. I think your first point certainly becomes a recommendation that we need to frame this. I think it's been implicit in a lot of this work, but you're right. It needs to be made explicit in the in my introduction. And Richard, please, you've got a comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, we do reference the COVID-19 pandemic in the forward, and if you go to the page 25, you'll see how the COVID-19 recovery plan will be informing the environmental strategy. And I believe when the COVID-19 recovery plan went to cabinet, one of the first things that we'll be doing will be looking at some of the potential, hesitant to say the word benefits, but some of the opportunities around this document and the COVID-19 recovery plan working together. So it has been looked at, and and from that assessment, we've also updated the action program to take into account any of the delays that we might expect from that.
Oh, thanks, Richard. So well spotted, but I do think perhaps Judith's first point is I need to mention that in the forward. Okay, so Mike had your hand up next, and then Laura, and then Jamie. So Mike.
Yeah, I just want to say, first of all, I think this is an excellent document. I want to pay tribute to the work of Richard and his team. It's very, it's evidence-based. When you look at the list of organisations who are stakeholders, it's impressive. When you look at the list of organisations that we've learnt from, it's impressive. And I'm not surprised that we are an organisation which other councils come to look at to see how it should be done in terms of environmental strategy. And I think also Richard is building on previous success. Again, when you look at the improvements that we've made since 2008, they are incredibly impressive. So Richard and the team, it's clear, it's very well written, it's very understandable, and it's a working document. I think it's something that we can be proud of. Of course, you can always improve on things. Of course you can. I find it hard to think how we could improve on this at this time. I think in terms of the COVID-19, I mean, clearly the COVID-19 plan is very, very strong on what we now call good economy and on green investment, green infrastructure, sustainable transport, all of that. And so clearly there are links. And when you look at the COVID strategy, it's building on work already being done, including the sort of stuff which is in this document. That's also really, really positive. But the one thing I do want to say is that the People's Assembly in 2008 actually set the direction for this. It's one of the reasons that we've been so successful, more successful than just about any other council in the country on these issues since then, in the 12 years since. But we have accepted and we have declared a climate emergency. And so in terms of any more talk or any more consultation, actually, I think we're there now. We've got to act, we've got to implement this. There is not time to wait. It is urgent, it is an emergency, and I'm sure that we can all, Labour, Lib Dem and Greens in particular, can agree that it is an emergency and that this is an ambitious plan appropriate for its time. I accept the recommendation that has come out of Judith's contribution. I think absolutely right, we need to be explicit in the forward that there are those links, and I know Cabinet will be looking very hard at that when it looks next week at this document. So I would commend this, and as I say, Richard, it's a fantastic piece of work, and I find it hard to think who else we could have involved in helping this to be an absolutely first-rate document. So well done and thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Laura, you are next.
Hi, Richard. First of all, I'd like to thank you and your team. Coming from an engagement and consultation background, I am so glad it wasn't me that had to analyse your free flow questions. I was looking at page 63 of 76 of the document, and it looked at the ranking of the priorities, and the first two priorities are working with partners and local communities. I think we've got a real opportunity here as a part of one of the positive things that have come out of COVID-19 is how communities have garnered together into groups at a grassroots level, and there's an opportunity for us as councillors, when I'm out of shielding, and those of us that are still shielding as well, and other community and other officers going forward to work with those communities and looking at the issues that have been brought up in the environmental strategy and look at it from a grassroots level upwards. That's really what I found really sort of positive about it, about those two most important things. And obviously partners will include statutory sector, private sector, independent sector as well. That's all.
Thank you, Laura. And I think there's a recommendation coming out of that about a recommendation to use the priorities as they've been set out. Okay, thanks very much. Jamie, you're on.
Thank you, Chair. I want to pick up on something that Councillor Stannard just mentioned about the range of partners that were involved. I understand from the Tyndall Centre that they requested in January that references to the Tyndall Centre's involvement be removed from the strategy, as it seems like an endorsement when they're not actually prepared to make without greater engagement from the science, with the science from the council, or without greater scrutiny. And there's still repeated references to the Tyndall Centre throughout, and I therefore ask whether these are going to be removed ahead of the cabinet meeting next week. And of course, I think it should go without saying that future work with the Tyndall Centre would, I hope, be welcomed and desirable for all involved. I just want to pick up also about the overall recommendation in this report, which is to recommend the draft environmental strategy to Cabinet. I've mentioned a number of these concerns in previous meetings, so I don't want to go into too much detail, but just to give a bit of background, I'm very concerned and shocked actually really to see that page 21 of the document states that the UK's new net zero target of carbon neutral by 2050 represents highest possible ambition. And I find that very strange when a lot of scientists say that 2030 is not only possible, it's necessary. And that, I mean, the Labour Party until recently, is still sort of talking about a 2030 target for the UK. The Green Party obviously is talking about that. Many people are talking about that, including many other councils. So I find it strange that the council seems to be endorsing a business as usual conservative target that kicks the can down the road.
Jamie, I do understand the point you're making now. Sorry to interrupt you, but we are really going over old ground. We're not really contributing to producing some recommendations. I wonder if you'd like to focus yourself on that, please.
Okay, can I come to my recommendation then, which is to ask about how the scatter pathways tool is being used and how it can be better used in this document. And what scatter does is it shows how much councils need to cut their emissions by within a given period. So for Norwich, it's 12.7% year-on-year emissions cut reductions, which is actually slightly better than the average for the UK. And the scatter pathways tool also shows what the impact of specific actions would be. So, for example, how much of an impact would be had by retrofitting 30% of the current housing stock to a medium level and 20% to a deep level by a certain date, or what the different effect would be if you vary those levels. So the whole point of the scatter pathways tool is to work out what the quantifiable actions that councils can do are to achieve the needed emissions reduction pathway across the population, and none of that's in the document.
So you're sort of extemporizing, and I do apologise, but I just want to think, and I think what you said, well, actually, you've made two recommendations. One is, and I think it's right to welcome, as a recommendation, we actually state our gratitude and welcome the Tyndale Centre. I'll have investigated the comments you've made about Tyndale in January, mentioning, and you've recommended that we make a point of using the tools in our work. Is that a fair interpretation?
To use those tools to set a quantifiable action plan that shows how we're going to achieve the necessary emissions targets, which is what scatter is available to do. And the action plan has changed. Scatter was made available. Now, so I want to know how we're intending to use it.
Yes. All right. I will. This is obviously, it's up to the panel. I must say I am concerned if we start setting the year-on-year ones, and I'll tell you why. It's because the way we have operated, as you know, we test, we try, we achieve, and we build on that. And so if you look at what we've done, we get an incremental growth, so a step by step by step, a nice, pleasant, smooth curve is not how we operate. So, I don't want us to 1 year exceed, well done, but the next year drop below and then be berated. That's foolish. We need to be sensible in what we do. So this is up to the panel, but I must say I'm very, very wary of setting us a target for each year. I think it is fine to set it for the period, but how that happens.
Can I clarify one more,
and then I must bring others in, Jamie. please say one more thing.
I'm not requesting that the council necessarily sets its target, because that target is already available. What I'm requesting is that the scatter tool from the Tyndall Path Centre is used to set a quantifiable action plan to show how we can achieve that. And that's needed because it's very difficult at the moment to judge how successful this action plan is going to be without indication of the sort of scale of the action. So, for example, introducing energy efficiency improvements in council homes, which I support, but there's no indication as to how many council homes that would be, what the level of retrofit.
Well, I mean, you're not going to set that. I'm sorry, I've noticed that there are other people who wish to speak, and I will come back if you feel we haven't clarified it. I'd like to give other people. Mike, you had your hand up, and then Richard did. Mike? Oh, and then Councillor Coe. Mike.
Right, okay. Sorry. Yeah. I mean, Jamie may already have answered my question. I just wanted to say, you know, if we restrict ourselves, if we were to have individual targets per annum every year, building up to the overall target, I mean, that might actually, it might sometimes be a challenge for us. Sometimes we might be able to exceed that, because as you say, Chair, that's how it works. In some years, we'll deliver more than an average improvement, and some years we'll deliver less. So I think what we need to do is to keep our eye firmly on the overall long-term target and be working to achieve that. And then it won't be a smooth curve. It's going to happen in fits and starts, because that's how it is, and also we'll learn and we'll adjust along the way. But I think that Jamie might have answered that. I think he's saying that's not what he's asking for. So if that's the case, then I'll shut.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. I will come back to you, but Richard, I think as well, I know he's got a contribution to make at this point, and I haven't forgotten you, Denise. You're on my list.
Thank you.
I just wanted to point out or highlight that obviously it would require a lot of monitoring time if we're going to look at sort of individual emissions pathways and how they're performing. So if I might highlight, you know, Scatter has a section about housing and retrofitting and how that would contribute towards you know, lowering emissions. Obviously what that would do is highlight the pathway that we need, but it doesn't provide the funding. So Scatter can provide or highlight where emissions need to be reduced, but what it doesn't do is provide the funding to actually deliver that. And I think we're still going to be tied with what's coming from central government to run programs like the council's Cosy City, for example. Oh, and second of all, I'd like to highlight that we did reference using the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change, but the way it's referenced is that we were fortunate enough to listen to evidence. So I think the evidence that they gave to the council, and that was then provided to the members of CEEEP. So we did take into account the comments that they made about referencing the Tyndall Centre and what Jamie highlighted, but I think we've made alterations to the document to take that into account.
Okay, all right, so Denise, and then I will come back to you, Jamie. Denise, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I'd like to preface my comments with very warm thanks to Richard and his team over many years. They're a very small team and they've achieved a great deal. But just to say that the Tyndall Centre advises that Norwich should be seeking a 12.7 reduction in carbon emissions year on year. Obviously, that's a very, very big challenge, especially we're a lower tier council and we have a small team of officers. The main thing to look at, though, is the action plan. And in my view, the actions proposed don't meet the challenge. We've had a lot of consultation comments, as Richard stated, but in fact, only very few changes have been made. We have 3 new action points, which are very modest. One of the main changes is the net zero by 2030, but that only refers to the City Council's operational figures itself, and the City Council's operational emissions amount to less than 2% of the city's overall emissions. So the scale of challenge is enormous. And some measures will be very expensive, for example, retrofitting residential properties. But some measures are not going to cost very much. For example, if Norwich City Council...
Denise, you're breaking up. You're breaking up. I'm sorry about this. Sorry.
Oh, I see. Okay. So some of the measures would... Can you hear me? Yeah. Some measures will be very...
Oh, yes, please. Yes. Yep. Carry
on.
on.
Measures will be very expensive.
Oh.
I can hear Denise fine if it's any help.
Denise, Jamie feels he can speak for you. I hope...
No, sorry, I was saying I can hear Denise fine.
Yeah, I don't think
you can hear Denise fine.
Me.
We cannot.
I think it might be your connection, Kevin.
Can everyone hear me? Yeah.
Just speak more slowly, apparently. That will help.
Okay, yes. So some of the measures in the action plan will undoubtedly be expensive. For example, retrofitting homes. But some of the proposals made by the consultees would not, in fact, cost very much, but have not been included. And I come again to a point which we Greens make time and time again. The Western Link. Now, the City Council withdrawing its support for that would not cost anything, but it would send a big signal and it would make a difference. So my bottom line is this: I can't sign up to the environment strategy. Very few changes have been made since the last, since the draft. I've got a few changes to recommendations, and first of all is to recommend a tracker tool, which I think goes without saying for any piece of work, any strategy, so that we can follow what's actually happening. My second recommendation is actually, and this would require further work, is to develop an adaptation strategy, which I did call for now 2 years ago, and was informed that an adaptation strategy was under preparation, and that actually it would form part of the environment strategy, but in fact it doesn't at all. There are a few bits and pieces in there, but nothing which adds up to an adaptation strategy. And as was highlighted in The Guardian yesterday, we're going to be facing in the UK and indeed across the world heat waves in the future. They're going to become more and more frequent, and an adaptation strategy is essential. So overall, I have to say, sadly, I can't sign up to this, and I'd like that to be logged and that to be notified to the Cabinet, please. And I'll happily write to the Cabinet and to yourself, Kevin, setting out why I can't support the strategy.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Denise. And I can say right away, it is recorded because that's what we're doing. And yes, you can write. Now, before going, Richard, you have obviously an input on this.
One of the actions in the action programme is to use the UK CEEEP 18 data, which is the Met Office latest data set on what they predict will happen in a short, medium, long term. And that was obviously released in the end of 2018. So we'll be using that information and something called an LCLIP, which is a local climate impact profile, to update how climate change can affect council services in the short, medium and long term, and that officers are working on that report now and have been for the last few months. So hopefully that will be ready to share with CEEEP hopefully towards the end of the year. And then in terms of tools for monitoring emissions, if any tools, please suggest them. Obviously, they need to be ones that are updated regularly so we can track progress. At the moment, Scatter gives us a pathway, but it's the first year, and it's unclear whether or not BEIS will be providing regular funding to see if those pathways are being achieved or not. So at the moment, there's only one regular data set, and that's the one that's produced by BEIS for local authority area emissions, and that's what we're using at the moment to track progress.
Okay, right. Now, Jamie, you wanted another bite of the cherry, so carry on.
Thank you. I do have 4, possibly 5 recommendations, but I just want to answer the question that Councillor Stannard, who's now seems to have disappeared from. I don't know if he's still.
Well, can we focus on the recommendations, Jamie, please?
Okay. I mean, it's potentially a recommendation, which is to actually that we do need a quantifiable action plan, and we do need year-on-year targets, which have been provided by the Tyndall Centre, and that's it's a year-on-year, so the amount of emissions reductions that's required should reduce year-on-year if we're fulfilling those targets. It's not really about criticising the council if it doesn't meet those targets. It's about being able to work out what's needed and the scale of action that's required to see whether more is needed. But coming on to my other recommendations, one that I'd like to raise, which is I have raised before, is to use the model that the council has used for the Solars Together auction to also apply to retrofitting. And I mean, that's something that the council already has contacts for through the Cozy City programme that was referenced earlier, which has been successful, as well as the model that's been used for the Solar Together. And it should be self-funding if it's done well, and it could address one of the biggest sources of emissions.
Jamie, I think that is happening. That's built in. Can you make some new recommendations rather than things that?
This is to use a retrofit option to provide affordable.
That is there in the strategy, though, because part of that strategy in connection with housing. And when I spoke about the recovery plan the other day at full council, I talked about that integrated approach. I'm not sure that you are adding a recommendation there that's, you're telling us to do what we're doing.
I don't see that in
Richard.
that particular.
Sorry to interrupt you, Richard. You've got your hand raised.
I'll have to check. I think there's something in the action program called Eco Aggregator, and it's something that we've been working on with Pixie and Cornwall Energy about using the power of aggregation for delivering eco savings to the public. But I know there's a slight difference between aggregating and reverse auctions, but I'll have a look into it.
Thank you, Richard.
Okay.
Can I come on to my second recommendation?
Go ahead.
Which is to use the new Good Economy Commission that I understand is being set up. I mean, I haven't actually seen the terms of reference for that, but Judith mentioned earlier about the referencing COVID, and it seems like there's an opportunity through that Good Economy Commission to either explicitly include in the terms of reference green recovery from COVID, or to have an environmental expert on the panel of that commission to show that how we can transition the economy as we emerge from COVID and address some of the changes that are coming forward. A third recommendation, do you want me to come on to that now?
Yes, please.
Again, is something that I have raised before, but that's to use the council's commercial investment power to help to transition to a greener economy. And I mean, I've raised examples before of councils like Warrington and West Suffolk and Hertfordshire and West Berkshire, etc., using the tens of millions of pounds that the council has access to through for its commercial investments to invest in things like renewable energy and co-located battery storage as well, which is an emerging and really high potential new technology, which would deliver a financial return to the council. It would provide jobs now as we emerge from COVID, and it would help to reduce emissions.
Can I just say on that, you know, I'm not saying no, because I'm looking at Judith, and they did actually, I say the Lib Dem members did, it must be last year at the, when we looked at the corporate plan, you know, put this business about battery storage in, wanted investment. And I think, you know, you're right in principle, but certainly at the time, and I think we are, battery, you're right, the technology is improving. But Richard, where are we up to now? Because, you know, my understanding is it's getting better, but it's still some way to go before we start investing.
So yeah, the technology is getting there. Unfortunately, some of the sort of finance mechanisms for paying for that energy were challenged. Again, that could undermine potential payback, and I think a few people have got burnt maybe going too early without those mechanisms being enshrined properly. So I think it's an emerging space that the council could definitely investigate participating in, but I think we'd want to make sure that those investments are as solid as possible before putting money there.
Okay, right. Okay, Graham, the fount of all wisdom, please come in.
Thank you, Kevin. Can I just pick up the more general point about the commercial property investment strategy? Clearly, that strategy was written a couple of years ago and effectively is part of the wider financial strategy of the council that is there to deliver income, particularly to the long-term sustainable income, to the revenue budget to allow us to support services. And one of those services it enables us to support is effectively the work we do in relation to the environmental strategy. So it's all part of a parcel. You mentioned whether we ought to be re-examining that commercial property investment strategy to particularly focus on effectively green investments and whether we can transition to a green economy using it. At the moment, the strategy does need some form of refresh, but we're not really in a position to do that because of an ongoing government consultation about the use of the Public Works Loan Board and the constraints on local authorities about the use of the finance that's available to it. So currently we've set aside certain monies in the budget to fund a commercial property investment strategy, and at the moment we're not really in a position to pursue that aspect of what we've budgeted for. Arising from this, we will need to review the commercial property investment strategy, and that currently gives an emphasis towards what you might term ethical investment as well as commercially viable investment, and those two things both work alongside one another, so we avoid particularly carbon intensive or otherwise unethical investments as part of that commercial property investment strategy. In any review of it, we will inevitably look at how the impact of COVID-19 gets and whether we could do more to deliver a more sustainable investment strategy for the council, both financially and environmentally going forward, because the two things will work largely in parallel in my view. But it doesn't really matter greatly what we put in the environmental strategy about that sort of action that we'll get round to as soon as resources allow and as soon as the government has given us clarity over what we're able to access Public Works Loan Board money to fund or not.
Right, okay, so I think we're getting to the point where if we have that something, it would be about investigating the possibilities. Jamie, I know you had your hand up before, but you have spoken, whereas Judith, you've got your hand up and you have spoken, but you haven't said a lot. So please come in. I will come back, Jamie. We'll come back to you.
Thank you, Kevin. I'd just like to say something about sustainable transport. And although it is mentioned in the document, it's not mentioned nearly enough. And I think that was borne out by the responses from some of the consultees. The elephant in the room, and it certainly doesn't appear anywhere in this document, is the fact that the City Council are not doing enough for sustainable transport by continuing to own and manage the car parks in the city centre. Now, this would be the perfect document for us to be saying what we will be doing in the future to reduce this use of this space in the city centre and to give support to sustainable transport. There's lots of things we can't do because we are a second tier authority, but this is one of those things that we can do. And I think it's an opportunity missed here. I can't think of I suppose a recommendation other than that it should be in there, and to say that we are looking to be reusing our car parks. I mean, COVID has given us a chance to rethink the norm, and I think this is where we do need to show how these car parks are linked to equality and to health, and it was difficult for the respondees to actually sort of put in order of importance their responses, because one thing is very much linked to another. And if you didn't have the car parks in the city centre, it would be much easier to make the city centre car free. It would give more room and space, safer space for cycling and walking. It would give more equality to people. It would make them healthier. It would protect our NHS. Now, we've been all about protecting our NHS. Now, wouldn't it be good to continue doing that by not having so many casualties presenting at hospital? We can do that by having 20 miles per hour and having a more sustainable form of transport in the city.
Okay.
We're not showing the interlinked, the fact that these things are all interlinked, and they're about, I say, not just about the environment, they're about equality and equality of opportunity for people to travel in the way they want. It's about reducing emissions and so many other things. And I think it's that sort of subtleness of the interlinkness of it all that we're missing here. And I don't think I can endorse this to the Cabinet without giving more credence to sustainable transport. And I think that is the elephant in the room. We're not doing that just by saying we're going to have more 20 mile per hour zones in the city. That's not enough for me. We need to be doing it now. We need to be doing it.
Judith, I think, Adam, I will come to you in a moment. Judith, I'd just like to refer you to, well, either page 12 of the strategy or page 24 of the report and page 25. And you will remember the motion that we passed, gosh, I don't know when now, but is it 2 years ago, 18 months? But
January 2019, I think.
We constantly bring out this integrated approach that we have. There is the economic, there is the social, there is the environmental. All have to move together at the same pace because one will drive back the other. And I am concerned that you've not seen just how much through the corporate plan, starting with the 2040 vision, how that's come down. And in this case, the strategy that we are adopting in order to bring that in. But I think this is a 2020-2025 one. And the reality is people are coming into the city. Now, you know, obviously what we'd like to do is come in either through public transport, but certainly electric vehicles.
Not public transport, no.
You don't want public transport,
No.
Okay. And right, interesting.
Well, not at the moment, thank you. We need to carry on
I'm talking
keeping
over
away
the
from one another.
Next 5 years, I'm talking about, not tomorrow. I'm talking about the strategy 2020 to 2025. So, Adam, are you making a point about this or about something else?
Both. I mean, I haven't spoken yet, so
no.
Okay, come in now.
Well, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to start by thanking Richard and Rachel for their huge amount of work they've put into this strategy. We're very fortunate to have them, and the amount of actions they've identified to meet our goals as a council are very diverse and detailed. And in terms of further details, I'm sure they'll be set out in the individual strategies that sit under this environmental strategy. I did just have a couple of points. One, I think on the question about prioritising, I think that the issues are interlinked, and probably asking people to link them, to rank them 1 to 10 was probably quite challenging. And there does seem to be a common thread amongst the responses that they didn't feel comfortable doing that. So maybe next time we could rethink that. Without wishing to go into the just one query in action 1.38 on page 35, it references Angie, and I wondered if that needed to be rectified, or whether that is still correct in the context of that specific action. I don't know if Richard could just come back on that before I say anything more.
Well spotted, Adam.
1.38. I think, to be honest, Angie are still working in the commercial sector, but I'll double check that and make sure that's correct. Obviously, we might not just specifically work with one energy company, maybe all.
Yeah, no, thank you, Richard. No, I mean, obviously, we're going to face, after the COVID pandemic, huge economic hardship across the country. We're going to face the worst recession we've faced for many centuries, and that's going to hit the most deprived areas of our city hardest. And we did need an ambitious strategy to build back better and to create new jobs to replace all those that have been lost sadly due to the pandemic. I do think we need to acknowledge that we'd like the government to go further. I think the strategy is very ambitious, and it is as ambitious as it should be within the resources at our disposal. However, when we say that the government are doing their best, I do think we should acknowledge that point, that we'd like the government to be investing more, because if they did give us more resources, then we'd have the ability to fulfil more actions as a local authority ourselves, to bring forward net zero carbon sooner than we can currently, because of the limitations on our resources. But taking those matters to one side, I'm very happy with the strategy. I'm very happy with the level of ambition and innovation within the resources at our disposal, and I'll be happy to recommend this to Cabinet. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Jamie, I'm sorry we sort of interrupted you, but I thought it was useful. So once again, make a special plea to, we're developing recommendations that we would make to Cabinet.
It was actually really useful to hear Adam's contribution, and I fully agree that we need a strategy that's going to show how we're going to have a green recovery from this. And that, I think, I just want to add to Judith's recommendation that potentially we could look at alternative sources of revenue to car parks, using that space as an alternative source of revenue, which is something I raised at scrutiny a couple of weeks ago, I think, and raised before. I've got two other recommendations, if that's okay.
Well, make them, because what I'm doing is I'm busy sort of compiling them.
Okay.
So go ahead.
So the first one is to that we can actually see the external stakeholder responses to the consultation and this document, because it's a key part of the strategy is working with the council's partners, and so I think it's essential that members of this panel and potentially also the wider public can see what partners say about it.
Right, I've made a note of that, and I will come back to it. What was your?
My other recommendation is to have a report on what the council is doing to lobby other external bodies to potentially from the cabinet member to increase funding. So, for example, I mean, on the what is cabinet doing to, or the council doing to lobby the LEP for increased funding and to have a more ambitious carbon reduction plan. I would hope that the council would be pushing for a 2030 target date, not the 2050 that's stated in this document.
Right.
And also, likewise, council council responses to government consultations, such as the Future Home Standard earlier this year. I was quite disappointed to see that the council didn't actually request a sooner target of 2030 and it seemed to accept the government's 2050 target. So I'd like to see sort of reports from cabinet as to what the council is actually doing to lobby government and other bodies, and that could provide further information that we can use at CEEEP to help shape our work.
Right, I think, can we just stop and welcome the new member?
Richard, I think you might have to speak so that people at YouTube can watch.
Okay. Yeah, hi.
Welcome. Right, so I've got all those. What I intend to do now is, obviously, we need to take, because if I counted each individual one, it's a ridiculous amount. I need to compile them, and then I will feed them back to you. And we already know that at least one of you will not be supporting this, which is, obviously your choice. So I think the first thing, which is nice and clear, and it starts from it starts from Judith's point, but it's been mentioned elsewhere, is that we acknowledge the effects of the COVID-19 and ask the forward to be amended in view of that to help to contextualize the strategy. That's the first thing I'm going to recommend. And if I'm going to take my time for two reasons. One is so Jackie can write it down, but also to give me time to think. We got a number of questions around the tools, and I think what we might do is turn that into a recommendation that these various decision-making tools are considered when we make appropriate decisions. I'm sure Jackie will turn that into better English than I have just done. I will come back to those. We've got the recommendations to do with the economy, and I think in view of the realities, and in particular the integrated way in which we work, where every single point in policy has an impact on another point of policy in all parts of the council, I think we need, excuse me, to make a recommendation that the council investigates how our investment powers can make a contribution to improving the environment. And then we've been asked really a series, what I see as monitoring type ones, which is fine. Sorry, I'm awfully sorry. Can you? Well, these are the kind of the monitoring in terms of the politics or the reviewing, and as you will see already, we have a number of reviews built in. I mean, there's the kind of very strong biennial one, but we have the quarterly figures already. There is an annual review. There is the possibility always of calling from scrutiny. So we've got those, but I think what, and I do accept the point that we, let me try and turn this into the Queen's English. To continue to recall that one of reference for this committee is to look at things that central government's help is needed. So that's the one about, so we will continue to lobby central government for the money and powers to achieve this. Yes, yeah, so we're going to ask Cabinet. Jackie's going to turn that into absolute beautiful English. There was, gosh, there was one other thing that I think we can do, and I can't.
Publishing the external stakeholder responses.
Thank you, thank you. And now look, there's an issue here, and I know for a fact that Jamie is aware of this. That all, and this happens in any research, all the data is compounded, and it's always a declaration, it's an ethical requirement that the data remains anonymous. Its sources are made, and I remember even at sort of just in my postgraduate studies always having to make this clear that you will not be individually identified, that all the data will be compounded and general trends will be sought. So I think we can't do that unless we have the specific commission from each of those public bodies. And I'm going to turn to Richard. Is that a possibility, Richard, or is that going to get? See, what I don't want to do is we've had a really. I'll finish what I'm saying, Graham, and I'll bring you in. Is, you know, we've done a really good consultation, and people have responded, and they've protected on all sides. They protect themselves by their anonymity. So I am reluctant, but Graham is going to cast some more wisdom.
I was just going to request, can you leave it with us to investigate the practical options around that? Legislation works two ways. One is GDPR and protecting people's own personal information, but the other one is the Freedom of Information and Environmental Information regs that come at it from another angle. And some of that will depend, the answer to whether we can release that information, or indeed whether we should release that information. We'll just need to check back on what we told the people at the time we harvested that information, and then advise what we can release and can't release. So I don't think you'll be able to resolve that today, but frequently when you're doing environmental consultations, you would expect the detail of individual representations, for instance, on any local plan, to be available and subject to scrutiny. Again, I can't answer the question of whether those will be made available, whether the individual representations can be made available now, but we'll need to do a bit of investigation to find out which categories and how best to view that. So I would just, you know, if there's a desire to interrogate that individual data, we need to think through what, if anything, can be released, both into the public domain and to our own members. I think invariably, if you crave that information, we won't be able to deny you it. The question is whether some of the information may need to be redacted from it in order to protect any assurance that we give to individual people about how we'll use that data.
So really, it's something we can't decide on. We can't make a recommendation, but it's noted, and we will investigate and see what's possible.
Kevin, can I make a suggestion? You might think
Go ahead.
About two separate categories of recommendation the panel wish to make. One is recommendations that you wish to make in relation to the content of the environmental strategy. And the second category would be things that as a panel you would like your officers to investigate further and report back to you, or recommend that you liaise with Cabinet on them. And I'm thinking that if you're wanting work to be done around the representations that were made and making them public available, that's a recommendation that you ought to make, not on the environmental strategy per se, but as one arising from the debate. And I think the report about the economic impacts as well potentially doesn't require any amendment to the strategy, but it might just require an amendment that arising from your debate, you will recommend to Cabinet, for instance, that if and when it decides to review the commercial property investment strategy, it specifically reports that any revisions through to your panel so that you can advise on potential amendments to that you would like to see to reflect environmental objectives.
Yeah, so I will be coming back to you, Jamie, but Graham, I think you've given us a really helpful sort of analytic tool there, because so I've gone down, as I tend to, I will go down rabbit warrens and get lost there. You're right, most of what we've said so far aren't specifically in relation to the strategic document. And what I'm going to do in a moment, after Jamie has spoken, is just ask Jackie to look again at the things she's written down, and okay, so we write which belongs to which group. That's very helpful. But before I go on, Jamie, you've got something to contribute. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just a couple of things, very short things. One is on the asking the external stakeholders. I would imagine that can be done fairly simply, just to ask them if they are okay for them to share. And just to clarify that I'm talking about the partner bodies, not the consultee responses from the general public. But the other point is whether it's possible for Jackie or someone to put the recommendations, the draft recommendations so far, in the chat so that we can see that.
No, that's not that isn't. I mean, it doesn't happen in a full meeting. It will rely on the verbal reporting. Yeah, but the other thing is just the reality that Jackie here is a minute taker. She is not a scrutiny officer, so she has one clear specific job. So that isn't going to happen. But what I will do, I will speak them out, Jamie, but thank you for that. Okay, Jackie has reminded me, going through the minutes she's taken so far, that we've made one recommendation in relation to the strategy document. And that is it's Judith's recommendation that the forward is rewritten to make much clearer, although the COVID-19 crisis is mentioned in the document, but if it's brought into the forward also as a way of contextualizing what follows. So that is the specific recommendation that will go forward with regard to the document. So we've now had, and Graham helpfully has suggested there are things that we've talked about which might go as recommendations to be considered and reviewed. And I'm going to turn to Jackie as the taker of minutes, just to remind me what they were. There was something about the yeah. Okay, so the first one is that we take into consideration these tools in making recommendations. Sorry, at the appropriate time. Yes, I did put that in. Then there was something about to investigate the use of the council's investment powers in order to what kind of wording we use? Yeah. Oh, Jackie's put that so much better. When investment strategies are considered, that our investment in the greener economy is considered within that. We had one on surplus investment powers, and then so Jackie's just reminded me that, yeah, that we there's a lot of the kind of the monitoring about how we're progressing this, and I've already mentioned those, but there was this thing about taking opportunities as required by our terms of reference to continue to lobby central government for additional powers and funds to achieve carbon neutrality as soon as possible. I can see you, Jamie. Don't worry. Is that okay to say? Okay. So those are the recommendation for, or in relation to the strategy document, and then we've got 3 recommendations to go forward, which will be considered and not about the document itself. So, Jamie, go on.
Thank you. Just to clarify, I think that the point about looking at the commercial investments should not be when looking at individual investments. The point is to when the council.
That wasn't the investment strategy.
Okay, thank you. Yes, and yeah. the point about the tools is that, you know, for example, the scatter pathway tool is that can be applied to the action plan in the document to provide a.
Well, yeah, I suggested something wider that it's considered in, you know, where it needs to be. I can't remember. So I'm going to ask Jackie once more now in this kind of second iteration to remind us what they are. I think, as I say, the first one in connection with the document. Well, actually, there are 2, aren't there? Because we've got the recommendation to amend the forward, and the second one is having amended the forward to accept and commend the document to Cabinet. So that's the first one, really. Then we've got 3 recommendations, not in relation to the document, that we'd like to consider. And the first one, well, actually, the first one we talked about. Second one will be the use of the decision-making tool. Yeah. Yeah. So the second one is, or rather the first of the non-document recommendations, is that when major decisions are being made, consideration is given to the advice that comes out, the application of the of those decision-making tools as environmental decision-making tools. We've got the second of the non-document recommendations is that there's a nice expression when the commercial investment strategy is reviewed, that the possibility of the contribution of council investment to a greener economy is considered. And finally, that the last one is the council, the cabinet member, the cabinet, as set out in the terms of reference for CEEEP, continue to lobby central government for additional funding and powers to achieve a green economy. And Laura's got her hand up.
Yes, sorry, my recommendation about, as a result of the consultation on the council building on the grassroots groups that have risen out of COVID-19.
Yes, okay, so that becomes another one. We build on the grassroots and involve. Yes, it's been suggested actually that we, so very sensibly, I'll include that in my forward if that's okay. Okay, Adam.
Thanks. On the recommendation regarding the use of scatter to see how we're progressing and achieving our goals in the environmental strategy, can I just clarify what reporting mechanisms there are on the progress of the strategy, either to this committee, full council, okay, cabinet, etc.?
Yeah. Right, I can answer that because it's the ones I said before. First of all, there are the cabinet reports and the calls here. There are some of the strategy measures are key performance indicators, and therefore you get every quarter data is generated with regard to it. There is effectively an annual review. There is the kind of more major biennial review that's built in. I can't tell you where, but I know it's in that document. And there is the call, there's always the call in from scrutiny committee. So those, and of course this group, we will be quick, I am sure, to say how are these things progressing. It could, I don't think it will, but it could almost be a standing item. How are we doing? No, so yeah, that's going to be too complicated. But that, you know, it is in our mind, it's in our consciousness. So I think that, does that answer your question, Adam? Yeah, okay, thank you. Jamie, I'm going to give you one more bite of the cherry and then I'm going to turn this big switch. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just to clarify on the point about the recommendation, that when decisions are made, that environmental impact is taken into consideration. That already happens because it's the environmental impact assessment. So I would like to ask what the sort of difference on that is.
Well, I think it was in several areas. It's about the strategy and also possibilities of, you know, it will affect decisions. So if you're saying are you saying we don't need that recommendation?
I would want it to be applied to the action plan, the scatter tools.
Oh, I would want it to be applied a little bit wider. Fine. I mean, you could put it into something like future actions.
Just okay. I mean, okay. the other question I had is about. I mean, the document currently says, "Rest assured that we will continue to lobby government," but we don't have any evidence of what is being done, and I think that can provide a valuable tool for future work for CEEEP. So if we can have a report.
Yeah, we do.
If we can have reports about what is being done to lobby government.
Can I just say, I mean, I take your point, but I would give two answers. One is we do, because I or the leader of the council are often asked, you know, particularly at the council, to do this, and then it's reported back. But of course, you know, this is something that we will, as CEEEP, we will do, and it will be reported back to CEEEP. So you've got those. It's not really something that needs to go into the strategy. Judith, you had your hand up, didn't you, before?
Yes. If you're minded to, in the forward, put building on grassroots groups coming out of COVID, would you also say building on the increase in walking and cycling that has come out of COVID and the behavioural change?
I'm happy to mention the behavioural change to include all of that, but I don't want the forward to turn into an itemised thing.
Just as you're going to say, build on the grassroots groups that have come out of it, something specific. This is increase in walking and cycling and behavioural change is very specific.
I'm happy to say the behavioural changes. That will actually include your cycling and so on. But I don't understand.
But I think you ought to be more specific. I mean, it could be behavioural change in people staying at home more. That's not what I want to mention. It is the walking and cycling.
But, well,
if you're going to include the grassroots groups that have come out of COVID, then please include the groups that are walking and cycling more than they ever did.
Well, you know, they are. If you're talking about them groups, they are more grassroots groups. I'm not going to turn.
This is a new group of walking and cyclists that we've never known before. I'm sorry, but there's no difference.
So if I mention the groups, then that will include those. If I mention the behavioural changes, that will include them. I'm not going to, Judith, I'm not going to sort of kick back and forth about a sentence in my...
No, but it's the principle. If you're happy to accept that you're going to mention building on grassroots groups coming out of COVID, then I think you can tell me that you're happy to include building on behavioural changes such as more walking and cycling.
What I can do is tell you that we're here to discuss in particular the recommendations, recommendations that come out of the consultation, and the point is made of the consultations with the prioritisation talk about the community groups. So that's the only reason I'm making that mention. It's not even a named group, is it?
It's not a named group for the new walkers and cyclists. It's not a named group. No. Can I also just ask you to be a bit clearer about on page 23, I think it was, about placemaking. I mean, I don't understand what the placemaking opportunity that we have is. It's page 23. Could you include it in the glossary?
Placemaking, yes. I mean, it will
do others understand placemaking? Put your thumb up if you do.
Graham's now the director of play.
I just want to find the sentence where it's
page 23. It's not.
I'm happy for a sentence to go in the glossary. I've already asked for some additions to the glossary, but I must say placemaking is a concept that I can take you to libraries full of books on the notion of but I'm happy for a glossary sentence.
But in the context of this, how can we as a council help through placemaking with the environmental strategy? Just tell me that. I don't know.
Because I'm going to pass to a geographer or a planner, Graham.
Thank you.
Graham, it's like just a minute. Answer that if you can.
I'll try and do this without hesitation, repetition or deviation then. In the context of where you've just drawn us to on page 23 of the paper. I think we're just using placemaking in a wide and generic sense to include a whole load of activities that the council does that influences the shape of Norwich. That could be anything from how we go about managing parks to many of our sort of planning related activities where you're actually physically planning out for new communities, neighbourhoods, or how they're amended to it. I'm not sure it needs any more of formal definition, and if it's a terminology that we find uncomfortable in operating with, it's a matter of finding something else that captures it. But a huge proportion of council activities, understandably in some way or shape or form, influence the either the current or the future environment that we inhabit in Norwich. I don't quite know what we can. I don't see anything deficient in what's written there. It's
the placemaking that, you know, means nothing to me.
I take your point, Judith, and I'm happy for a sentence to go in. And thank you, Graham, for giving a better explanation, because I'd have gone into sort of conceptual language and talk about a nexus where themes and events meet. But yeah, thanks, Graham. But I'm happy for a sentence to go in there. It doesn't have to come as a kind of a major recommendation, but it will. A sentence will go in there. Richard, are you happy? You're prepared to put a.
I'll put something in the glossary of terms that gives a bit of context about what placemaking means. Thank you.
Right, I'm sorry. I think we're at the point where we're kicking the ball round and round. So I'm going to bring this meeting to this point that there are a number of recommendations, and I'm going to propose them, and I will need a seconder. Is somebody prepared to second them? I will start. So that first one, direct with regard to Cabinet, with regard to this draft strategy, that the forward is amended to contextualize the development of the strategic document within the events surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic, and to mention the wishes of groups that have emerged from the consultation. Actually, can I just backpedal, because that's not a it's not a strategy document, something that we will do. So if there's going to be one, so it's as simple as that first of all, I amend the forward in that way, and that having done so, sort of a 1B, having done so, we recommend acceptance of the strategy to Cabinet. So that's the first direct one. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Adam. So can we vote on that one to start with, please? Thank you. Okay, and remember to keep your hands raised if you are happy with that. Okay.
Sorry, Max. Sorry, is Councillor Osborne hand up?
Yes.
Councillor Osborne,
just
Giles, Councillor Maguire and Councillor McCartney-Gray voting on that. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay.
It's not a recorded vote. I'm just calling names.
Okay. Any votes against?
Can I just clarify, please? I'm happy to see the forward amended to take into account COVID, but I don't really feel I can vote for a recommendation for the strategy. So are we voting for the recommendations, or for in the context of the strategy, or for just the individual recommendations, please?
Well, this subject to amendments.
Okay, so it's a panel decision, and the recommendation is we propose acceptance to Cabinet having amended the forward.
Can I? So yeah. So
no. Sorry, Jamie, because we're going to go round in circles and we're going to put another semicolon in somewhere. That's one recommendation, and we've had a vote on it, and
so
it's been carried.
I cannot endorse the strategy as a whole.
Okay.
I withdraw my vote on that. I'm happy to include a reference to walking and cycling, but I cannot endorse the strategy as a whole without.
Right, so you don't data. Vote. Okay, so we've got 3. We've got 3 for. We had none against.
Well, I want to vote against.
Likewise, I want to vote against.
Strategy.
I also don't support the strategy.
So we've got 3. Hang on, we've only got 2. Can you keep your hand raised till it's counted, please? So we've got 3 against. And as chair, I will use my casting vote. Okay, thank you. So we've now got, I think it's 3 recommendations, which I will read out or speak out again. And these are not with regard to the strategy document. So so the panel also wishes to recommend to Cabinet that the available decision-making tools, so that's to include things like the scatter and maybe others that come along, that we use the additional, the available decision-making tools and consider them in, what was the wording?
When assessing
yeah, when assessing decisions making for decisions made for the environment. So that's and I'm proposing that. Do we have a seconder? Right. So we have a seconder in Denise Carlo, thank you. Can we have votes for it? So how many for, sorry? We've got 5 for. Any votes against? Yeah. And abstentions?
I'm not entirely clear as to what the recommendation actually means, so I can't see what is different. So
right, so you're abstaining. Okay, thank you. Within this group of the panel also recommend, we've got the one that, the nice expression, when reviewing the investment strategy, the council will take into consideration what was it?
Consideration
investment in the green economy. Graham, just if it's gone.
I just had an alternate form of words that I thought may better.
Oh, yes, I'm sure it'd be far better. Go ahead.
Which would be the recommendation would be if and when the council's commercial property investment strategy is revised, you request that CEEEP is involved in its preparation to ensure opportunities to stimulate the green economy are maximised.
Thank you so much, Graham. That's really nice and clear, and it's far wider than I was suggesting. So I feel slightly, I'm a plagiarist in proposing it. So perhaps somebody else would like to propose that. No, okay, well, I propose it. Do I have a seconder?
I was happy
Thank
to
you,
propose
Laura.
and have.
Oh, sorry, I'm Jamie. So all those for that fine recommendation, please keep your hand raised.
Thank you. Unanimous.
So that's unanimous. Let the record show. Thank you so much, everybody. And what was the other one?
The other one was just to note where things get considered. I will
yeah. Yes. So note when considered the terms of reference of this panel, and to continue to lobby central government for additional powers and funds to promote, to achieve carbon neutrality as soon as possible. So that's what I'm proposing. Do I have a seconder? We've got a seconder. All those in favour? Keep your hands raised. 5 in favour. Anyone against? No. Anyone abstaining?
Abstain because it's essentially the same as we've already got, so it doesn't make any difference.
Thank you. Thank you.
And what we need is a report.
Jamie, thank you, Jamie. I'll turn you off if I knew how to, but I don't. Right, so that's the lot. Okay, I'm going to close this meeting. I know it's been slightly fractious, and I think that's the nature of technology. As you know, it was nearly 15 minutes late in starting because of technologies. And that hasn't helped anybody. And Councillor Stannard had to leave before the end because of previous arrangements he couldn't get out of. So he hasn't been here for as much of the meeting as I'm sure he would have wished. But thank you all within these kind of testing times. And I must say to Denise, thank you again, because Denise was present at the very first meeting I chaired, and she was quite kind to me then. And so I must say thank you again, Denise. And thank you all for working so hard at these very difficult times and for this meeting. Okay, thank you. And we're now closing you off. So I say goodbye.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you very much indeed.
And thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a good holiday, Richard.